Chapter 9. The palace was very quiet. There were quiet rustlings and loud shoe tapping. The king was also pacing up and down a small council chamber. Beside him, some important people tried to calm him down. An usher came through the door and went up to the king and announced that Count Walter had arrived. The king beckoned him to let him in. Count Walter entered the hall with his 2 attendants and addressed the king. "Your Majesty, I have just heard what has happened to your daughter. I came as soon as I could. I am terribly sorry about this. I have already put my men on the case, and if I can be of any assistance, I am at your service," said the count, with all the feeling and devotion of a count. "What a disgrace! My daughter has been kidnapped in broad daylight. I have already locked her bodyguard in a dungeon. Either he was unfit for his task, or he was involved in the abduction. I have a man interrogating him. Who could have done it, and with what intent? If I catch the bastard, I'll have his head cut off, at the very least," said the king, and fretted, shaking his fist. He was very nervous. No wonder, being a king who could not protect his daughter in his own palace. The lords at court, or in the whole country, might think this was a sign of weakness. They'll question what kind of king could allow this can happen. They may even lose confidence in their king. Besides, of course, he loved his daughter very much and didn't want anything to happen to her. She was all he had from the time she was a little girl. He felt he would do anything for her, but at the same time, he was also haunted by the thought that his kingdom might be in danger. The count began to mislead the king. "They'll probably demand a ransom. Why else would they have kidnapped her?" he suggested, as if in earnest. "A ransom? How could they imagine that the king would pay such scoundrels? What would the lords think of me?" worried the king. "Your Majesty, it is Lydia's life we are talking about." Suddenly, a guard rushed in with an arrow and a roll of paper. The arrow had a piece of jewelry tied to it. "Your Majesty, this was just fired into the palace courtyard, but we saw no one. I think it must be important," said the guard, panting. The king took the arrow from his hand and removed the jewelry. "This is Lydia's bracelet. Read the message. Quickie." "We have the princess," the guard began reading at a calm pace. "If you want her back safe, pay 10,000 gold pieces, put it in a chest, throw the chest into the stream just below the North Bridge, at noon tomorrow to be precise, and then leave the area. If you keep watching the area around the bridge, you will not see the princess again. If there is not 10,000 gold pieces in the chest, the princess will not be seen again. If all goes according to plan, we will release the princess at another location near the palace." "That is the message," said the guard, as if he had done his job well. "What a disgrace! 10,000 gold pieces?" The king continued to fret, and then thought for a moment. "Wait a minute. How did the count know about this?" "I did not know. I only suspected. What other reason could there be for someone to kidnap the king's daughter? And if I may say so, I think it would be safest if your Majesty would pay the ransom," explained the count. "Here." He stepped a little closer to the king and added quietly, "At least you would pretend to pay it." "What do you mean by that? Do you mean a raid?" "I knew a vassal whose daughter was also kidnapped some years ago," the count began. "He had enough money to pay the ransom, but he thought that if he did so, his vassals would think him weak, disrespect him, and would no longer serve him. So he organized a raid to deliver a fake ransom. He hired the best trained soldiers for the job. What can I say? It got pretty ugly. For the robbers, I mean. They were caught one by one, so it was easy to track down their employer. Needless to say, he was punished," he said, crossing his index finger across his throat. The king pondered, then turned to the guard. "Summon the Security Council at once." "Yes, your Majesty." The guard bowed and hurried out of the room. The count then spoke. "Your Majesty, I am happy to offer my assistance. I have highly trained soldiers who could handle such a situation." "Thank you. I will first discuss this matter with my Security Council, but I will also consider the count's offer. But now I must go." Then he left the count in the room. Chapter 10. The smoky tavern was full long before, but people were still arriving, and many were standing around with glasses in hand. The noise grew as people drank more and more. To someone who had just entered, it all seemed like a big mess, but after a few minutes of observation, one could see the order of things. 4 waiters and 2 bartenders poured drinks and carried glasses non-stop. In one corner, some kind of music band was trying to drown out the noise, but it was hopeless. Their music could barely be heard and no one was paying attention. At the smaller tables, they were playing cards or some kind of board game. Of course, the game was for money. At the larger tables, smaller groups would form and tell each other stories or argue about something. Usually the one who talked louder or shouted louder was right. On the benches along the wall, women giggled on men's laps, dressed in linen. They were not only on the benches, but also at the tables. Arlo and Owen had no money, so they couldn't order drinks for themselves. So, in order not to be noticed by the barman and thrown out, they lifted an empty jug from one of the tables and held it in their hands as if they were drinking. Thus, they moved from one place to another, watching the Count's soldiers. After a short time, the soldiers finally drank the last of their beer, and with great difficulty, got up from the table. They staggered heavily down a dark corridor towards their guest rooms. Arlo and Owen followed unobtrusively. Here, the noise of the tavern was very faint. The soldiers entered a room and locked the door. The boys went to the door and began to listen. 2 minutes later, they could hear the snoring. Arlo took the handle, but Owen put his hand on it. "Arlo, is this a good idea?" "Trust me, Owen. It's a good plan. It will work," Arlo reassured his friend. Slowly, he pushed the handle, but the door did not open. "The key. Try the key the miller gave you at the mill. He said it would be good for many doors," Owen whispered. Arlo's eyes lit up, and he took out the key. Shockingly, the old key turned in the lock. The boys crept slowly into the dark room. They waited for their eyes to adjust to the moonlight, and then set about the plan. When they soon reappeared, 2 bundles in hand. In the great hall of the inn, no one was looking. Slowly they made their way towards the exit. Suddenly, a man jumped up from the card table and shouted over the noise of everyone, "Nobody is going anywhere. Everyone's cheating tonight." The music stopped and everyone fell silent, looking at the man. Both Arlo and Owen were forced to stop and look so as not to attract attention. Behind the man with the cards, someone grabbed a bottle and with one strong movement hit him on the head. He immediately sat back in his chair and slumped on the table. The music resumed and everyone went about their business. Arlo and Owen walked out of the exit and started down the street. "Head for North Mountain, along the creek until you come to a triangular rock at the foot of the mountain," Arlo said a few yards later. "Yes, that's where the hidden castle will be. But are we sure we can trust these 2 soldiers?" Owen asked. "After all that beer, sure. And the old beggar's farm is just over there. They took it from him so he wouldn't bother them. It all fits." "And what happens in the morning when they wake up and can't find their clothes?" Owen raised the bundle in his hand. "First of all, they won't wake up in the morning, but at noon. And secondly, it'll be with a headache so bad that I don't think they'll think about it. Third, what do you think they'll remember about tonight?" "I think you're right," Owen agreed. "So far your plan is good. I just hope the rest of it works.